I love scale. There's just a different vibe at this conference than a lot of other shows, so I'm looking for kind of like a little bit more interactive sort of fun session, right? The kids convinced me to pull the kilt out of retirement. I haven't worn these things in a while because in California, these are amazing, but in Seattle, not quite as frequently, which is ironic because they come from there. But we're gonna have a little bit of fun with this because this is kind of a silly topic, right? Like, you know, what's with all the titles? This is one of those talks that sometimes you know exactly what you want to say and you just want a platform to say it. This is one of those where I was like, I feel like we need to have a conversation as a DevOps community about what's going on, how we feel about this. And it was an opportunity to sort of explore it, a couple of different avenues as I thought about this. And I really want this to be a conversation starter for all of us to try and make things a little bit better. Before I get into the meat here, got to pay the bills. I'm Ben Rockwood. I'm the VP of Engineering and Operations at Mondu. Mondu is kind of the other side of configuration management. We scan for vulnerabilities, we enforce policy. It's the tool that I always wanted. You ever had a situation where you had to like tweak a configuration in like your SaaS or your IaaS or whatever, your clouds, your network switches, whatever it is, and you were just like, if that ever changes, I am screwed. You ever like been in like 3 a.m. in the morning, but like, did they make sure they knew about that when they made that change, right? We can put that into policy, keep you aware of it all the time. Something that I've always wanted, and it's a tool that I love, and I love working there, so. Mondu. So, how did it come to this? Untangling SA, DevOps, SRE, and PE. Or, turning your midlife crisis into a successful talk at scale. Thank you, thank you. Good quote from Alvin Toffler: the illiterate in the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. Does this feel like a cycle that we go through quite a lot? And DevOps has changed a considerable amount because so many iterations have happened. One of the things that's amazing about what we do in software is that our velocity is incredibly quick. If you think about a lot of the parallels that we draw from manufacturing, which there's an incredible amount of relevancy, but the cycles of improvement in the manufacturing world have been very, very slow, right? You only build a plant often, right? When you do, you need that to last for years and years and years. You can't just down. Am I fading in and out? You can't just rip it down and start over because new way that you heard about doing things when you were at a conference, right? So we have a lot of advantages in being able to move really quick, but it can make things confusing. So first, is there a problem? Why do we have all these titles, and is it even a problem that we have all these different sort of title sprawls? So here's a first interactive bit. All right, guess the job. This is kind of an eye chart, I know, but I want you to look at it if you can see it, or you can get out your phone and make an appointment for your optometrist. Guess what this job is? Anybody want to guess? What's the title? We got CI/CD in there. We got infrastructure as code in there. We got Prometheus, Grafana, Elk in there. SRE? DevOps? Anybody else? Help desk. I certainly hope not. Yeah? Answer, platform engineer. All right. Oh, by the way, I forgot to say, can we give another round of applause for Justin in his talk? He had a huge amount of material and he speed ran it. I thought like I was gonna get lucky and I would just start 10 minutes late, but he like totally speed ran it. He has a huge amount of material on YouTube and out on the internets that is really good. I've gone through a lot of his material, so I'm like super excited to go after him. So he was amazing. Okay, so platform engineer. All right, job number 2. All right, qualifications, DevOps, DevSecOps, Microsoft Azure. I don't know why those 3 are in the same row. 10 years of experience. Git version control, Kubernetes persistent volumes. I think it's a little interesting when you see a job requirement that has like something as specific as persistent volume claims. Like they've clearly had some issues with this in the past. Exactly. There's an interesting story. I'm sure that we could this is like reading the tea leaves, right? I'm sensing an Azure with a broken Kubernetes implementation. Exactly. All right, what is it? System administrator. SRE, DevOps. Okay, another platform engineer. Security engineer. Ooh, there you go. Answer. Lead platform engineer. All right, number 3. Deploy, upgrade, operate, maintain, and scale a suite of mission-critical GNC products and services. Work with SpaceX HPC team to monitor and maintain 4,000 plus HPC cluster. So it's at SpaceX. So they ought to be very accurate because these guys know. Survey says? DevOps, sysadmin, system engineer, SRE. Is anyone from SpaceX here? Did you post this? I know there are SpaceX people here at the show. All right, answer is GNC DevOps engineer for the Falcon program at SpaceX. Now, I would think these guys would really nail it down. All right, did anyone see that one coming? All right, last one. Software engineer? SRE? Release engineer? DBA? Prometheus, Splunk, and Grafana. I don't know, maybe DBA. Familiar with CDNs? Any other guesses? Ooh, DevOps architect. Full stack developer. Answer? Site reliability engineer, REST API at Apple. Okay. Have we demonstrated that there's maybe a bit of an issue here with what title describes what role, and that maybe there's something that we need to deal with? I thought I'd throw this in as a bonus. SRE, Linux System Administrator. I don't know if that's better or worse. But one of the things, you notice that you see a trend in the requirements. Most of the requirements look pretty similar, right? Okay, so we have a problem. When we can no longer change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. So I want you to think, I know that there's a lot of talks that we talk about culture and we talk about it in the abstract. Like there's this thing, it's like the bureaucracy, it's like the government. There's a situation and it should be changed by someone, somewhere. I want you to very personally, think about you and your resume. What does your resume say, right? When you go out and look for roles, what keywords are you looking for? When you're hiring for your teams, what are those job descriptions looking like? Let's try and make this very personal. So, as always, I am kind of a historical foundations sort of dude, so we're going to go and start at the beginning. In the beginning, system administrators. Originally, the first iteration was operators, actually. We had big, huge computers that took punch cards, and someone had to take those, keep them all in order, feed them into the machine, wait for it to go, and then come back out as completed output, and then provide that back. And these lucky people who ran these things back and forth were the first operators. As we get into the 1960s and we start seeing multi-tenant systems sort of show up, multi-user computers, we start needing someone to sort of tend the garden, right? We see more and more dependence between these things. You really see the use of the word system administrator start to pop up a little bit later in the early 70s, coming into the 80s. The first use of the term network administrator emerges around the ARPANET and as LANs are approaching. And this is generally defined as someone who's tasked with managing the shared resources of a given system to unburden users. Okay? Then we see systems being more and more interconnected, right? As we get into the late 80s, the 90s, the early 2000s, multi-user systems stop really being multi-user systems. They start being single-user systems. Systems are growing across the network. And some of you guys who've been around for a good long time might actually remember a time where there was a blur between network administrator and system administrator, because it wasn't clear if network administrator meant the person who administered the network gear, or if it was the person who managed the services that were out on the network, right? There was a time where it was a little bit blurry. Thankfully, all that sort of flushed out over time. As we move into the cloud age, everything sort of becomes self-serve, and hooray, hurrah, finally, once again, we've come to this place where we're now excited that we'll no longer need system administrators, because this is point and click, it's so easy, you don't need anybody else out there. Except, there still is, right? Accounts, organizations, all these different sort of resources that need to be managed. Ultimately, as a service, is cheaper and faster and easier to use. It's got this sort of fully managed palette of components, but it ultimately turns out that we still have the exact same sort of problems that we had before. You still need somebody to sort of manage all of that. I want to take a brief aside and talk about PaaS for a second. You remember when cloud first came out, we started thinking about 3 flavors of cloud. Software as a service, hooray. Infrastructure as a service, hooray. And platform as a service. PaaS has always been really fascinating because at the time it was sort of the odd man out. Just like, what exactly is that? And ultimately, Heroku kind of came along and became the canonical definition of PaaS. And the funny thing is ever since, it's been this it's Shangri-La. It's the thing we want. And we see this now in engineering sort of growing up. It feels like everyone's sort of trying to go back to that place, but we've gone through a lot of iterations of PaaS over the last 20 years now that I feel like never quite get there. And one of the challenges that we always have is that users are really opinionated, right? Developers have a lot of opinions. You know, they like this, but it doesn't do that, right? And so that's one of the things I think that's actually feeding this explosion of platform engineering right now, is trying to build that one perfect little PaaS just for you and your organization. And it's really challenging because not everyone's going to agree on it, right? So this space, platform engineering, continues to be a really interesting one as it evolves. I have a feeling that, you can already sort of see forward the talks 5 years in the future, and they're like, remember when we all tried to do platform engineering and we thought we would solve all the problems for everyone, and then they all hated it and then it burned to the ground. Not that that's actually going to happen, but we kind of see how these go. The point is that when we sort of boil it down, all throughout time, since the beginning of time, all these people in all these different situations have always had sort of 2 things in common, right? Administrators, operators, whatever you want to call them, are fundamentally providing expert assistance, and they're managing the commons, right? I think you can sort of boil that down for anything out there. And these functions continue to evolve with technology. They get renamed, they get splintered off, but ultimately it comes down to those sort of 2 things. Even though you might not have to rack and stack your servers anymore, you're still doing the same sort of tasks. It's just that somebody else is doing that, sort of seeing the sort of an outsourcing of some of that stuff. One of the things that if you haven't read Team Topologies, fantastic new book. Gene Kim and his gang of folks over at IT Revolution keep doing amazing things. And Team Topologies is a really fantastic book. And it sort of takes these two core themes and actually embeds it sort of in their way of looking at the world, which is in two different types of teams, which is enabling teams and platform teams, right? Someone's got to manage that commons. If you haven't seen this before, stream-aligned teams, value stream-aligned teams, this is development teams that are doing whatever it is that you're supposed to be doing, right? And we want to unburden them as much as possible. Platform team, which I think has really helped codify that idea of platform teams, to be able to manage that commons and provide a great experience for all those stream-aligned teams. And then we have, enabling teams that kind of parachute in, help accelerate things, improve a team, and then complicated subsystem teams. It's a great book. I highly recommend going through and reading it, because it's a nice, flexible enough framework that I think this is one of those things that will stand the test of time rather than be one of these fads that kind of comes and goes. So, what's the fundamental difference between all these different functions? I think ultimately the question you always have to be asking is, who's the customer, right? When you go to work, who are you trying to serve? Who's the customer? For each of the different types of role descriptions that are out there, we have a different customer, right? SRE, who's my end customer? The end user is my customer. That's the one I'm thinking about, right? PE, developers are my customer, right? If you are a network administrator, it's network users. If you're a system administrator, it's the users of that individual system, right? Now, what about DevOps, though? Who's the customer of DevOps? Anyone and everyone. Does anyone disagree with these definitions? Okay. Huh? Product managers. Placators of middle management. So, what's the deal with the DevOps? Go ahead. Yep. Yep. Absolutely. It's all about making sure that you're serving whatever that customer is. So I think you could easily, those terms end up being essentially interchangeable, right? So with regards to DevOps, the roots, right, really came out of manufacturing, right, and lean. And DevOps was our lean moment. There were a number of practices that came out of the Toyota production system, got codified by a couple of folks, and turned into lean, right, and had a huge impact on the world of manufacturing and all other forms of industry. DevOps really was our lean moment, right? And in technology, we sort of had two ways that lean infiltrated us, right? One was on the development side, which we called agile development. The other was agile operations, which we call DevOps. And if you don't recall, the sort of very first moment that DevOps sort of appeared, it was actually at the Agile conference when there was a, what do you call it, birds of a feather on agile operations, and only 2 people showed up. And the rest is history. Everything sort of grew out of that. Of course, the big moment after that was the first DevOps days against, right, which then sort of everything codified and grew. But ultimately, we were seeing a lot of these sort of classic lean principles, management principles, sort of infiltrate into industry through agile development and agile operations. As a result, DevOps really is a philosophy that's rooted in practices and norms that we built on top of agile, right, and we've taken forward. It is not a title. It is not a title, right? Agile developer is not a title, right? And I double checked. There you go. And was Agile Developer actually in the title, or was it in the description somewhere? Yeah, which is a good. However, if you search for DevOps on any of those job sites, you will find thousands and thousands of references. It just doesn't make sense, and it's something that we need to stop. And the irony here is that I and others, I remember back in 2011 saying DevOps is not a title. Do not use DevOps as a title. And everyone, sure, right? Now, to be sure, there's some practical aspects of the way that you title something, right? Whether it's right or it's wrong, you're trying to find the individuals who you need, right? And those buzzwords have a tendency to go and capture those. And so there's a tendency to want to latch onto those. But we need to get over that and like move on, right? And cease to do that. So I want to break down this into this sort of idea into 4 layers. And whenever we approach something systematically, we always want to use the system of profound knowledge, right? And within it, there are 4 aspects of the system of profound knowledge, right? We need to have a theory of knowledge, how we know what we know, appreciation of the system, everything is connected as part of a system, an understanding of variation, right? There's always natural variation that happens in a system, and psychology, which is an important aspect that we always need to sort of keep in mind here. And so when we look at this, there's sort of a multi-dimensional series of changes that have been happening around us, right, that we're a part of. That is that society is changing. It's evolving, right? The expectations for how we're going to interact as a society has radically changed. I went into a liquor store about a year ago in downtown Seattle, and you actually had to install their app on your phone to make a purchase. Like, I ran in there for like 3 minutes to buy a bottle of champagne on the way to an event, and they're like, you got to install the app. I'm like, there's nobody who comes into your store that like just doesn't have a smartphone? They're like, no, everyone installs the app. I still like to think that there's people who are holdouts, but apparently not many. Society is irrevocably changed in a way that it's not going back. As a result, it's forced organizations to change, right? Everyone has to have an app, everyone has to have a website, everyone has to expose all the different services. No matter what you do, there has to be an online presence, there has to be a way of interacting with it. And as a result, we as industry and practice are constantly working to try and share knowledge with each other about how best to accomplish these things. And so we're constantly evolving and trying to develop norms. But also in that, you are having to keep pace with all these things, right? And it's constantly changing, it's constantly evolving. There's always the next epiphany, and we all need to get on board with that bandwagon. Or do you? Do you? This is maybe something that I don't think we maybe ask ourselves enough. Do you need to jump on that next trend, right? Do you need to go into that place? Know thyself and know thy gifts. Here's one thing I see happening in our industry that's really challenging. A lot of us who have gone into the operations side of the world have done it because of the fact that we really like learning and we really like sharing that with others, right? A lot of folks who became system administrators and operators actually started out in support at some point, right? They have natural skills, they have a natural tendency to want to do these things. There's a lot of us in this room who have those general skills, right? And we really like doing that. But we're seeing this tendency to want to push operators to act more and more like developers. And this is a transition that's actually really challenging. The mental mindset of a developer is very different than the mindset of an operator. As much as we like to say that, we don't like the fire drills and we don't like the 2 a.m. wake-ups, there's actually some of us who we like being the guy who runs in and rescues and saves the day, right? A lot of developers who like to sit in a corner and sort of not be bothered and left alone for long periods of time. 2 very different sort of mental mentalities. And I don't think we're paying enough attention to the psychological aspects of asking one to do the other and the challenges that come up with that. Ultimately, the song always sort of remains the same. Things don't really change, but we do get caught up in these shifts. And so it's really, I think, important for us to think more clearly about the roles that we're hiring, to think more clearly about the roles that we're entering into and as our roles are evolving, and allow ourselves to see that even though there's a big push for such and such today, that thing will normalize out in the near future. Everything sort of ultimately commoditizes and becomes more normalized. And as that shift occurs, do I want to be a part of that shift? How do I want to treat other people who are a part of that shift? Are they prepared to sort of go through that? Ultimately, you know, the solution to the title insanity isn't super straightforward. In manufacturing, you see titles sort of more like this: manufacturing engineer, maintenance technician, inventory control specialist, industrial engineer, manager. I think that there's a lot of value if we start thinking of ourselves in more general sort of terms as operations engineers, and start having a lot more clarity around functional roles within organizations, so that we're a little bit more clear about sort of what you're going to do instead of just hiring in, right? If those roles that we looked at earlier, what the heck is your actual job? What are you actually going to be doing? It's really hard to determine. We sort of want a generic set of skills, and then we want to apply it in a specific way. And a lot of us have gone into interviews where we were applying because it looked like a place we wanted to work, and then our next question was, what the hell am I actually going to do when I get there? And then all of us kind of know that whatever they said is probably mixed, right? And then you're going to get on the job first day, and you're going to go, okay, well, no, what am I actually going to do, right? We can have a lot more clarity around these things, but we need to stop thinking in terms of these big sort of trends and, you know, you're a DevOps or you're an SRE or you're a platform person. Instead, we need to be thinking about what is the function of the value that you add to the organization, right? You're going to service developers. You're going to be concerned about uptime, right, in the customer experience. And so that we're, from day one, thinking about who's my customer and how do I best serve them with my skills in the organization. A couple of recommended resources. Team Topologies is a book that I recommend reading. Of course, it's best for organizational leaders who are looking at how they can sort of evolve their organizations. But I would recommend each of you to at least take a cursory look at it or find any of the sort of videos out on YouTube or whatnot, just to make sure that you're aware with it. So as you start hearing these teams like enabling teams or, you know, platform team, that you're using the same sort of lingua franca that they are. The NoOps talk by John Allspaw, you can also take note of my comments being like, you're totally wrong. Platformengineering.org has a huge amount of resources available on it, and of course the New Economics by Dr. Deming, always an important read. So, it's something that we need to sort of clarify, and I think over the next couple of years, it's something that we can sort of sort out as an industry. But I'll tell you honestly, I thought by now, in 2025, we would have sort of sorted these things, and we haven't. So hopefully this is a conversation we kind of can keep going and push forward, and hopefully we'll see a lot more sort of clarity as we roll forward the next couple of years. Any thoughts anyone wants to share? Do I have time?
You've got time.
I got lots of time.
Run the mic around, or I'll throw you the first question.
Sure.
We are talking about platform engineering, but really AI is reshaping the world. How do you think the AI journey plays into the conversation around platform engineering and really this broader set of operational principles?
Good one, good one. I think the impact of AI is going to be really interesting as just sort of a force multiplier applied to anybody's individual set of tasks. So I think it does multiply things forward. I think it's a really hard time to be a junior engineer coming into industry, right? Who's using AI in their day-to-day work right now? All right, now who would describe themselves as a vibe coder? Anybody, nobody's else, no, only Chris is vibe coding? Okay, if you haven't heard of vibe coding, it is a pattern of interacting with AI to write applications. So the idea now is in vibe coding is you don't write a single line of code. You go into your code editor or some AI-enabled platform. Cursor is a really, really popular one where you start out by describing your application, and letting it write it for you, and then seeing what it produces, and then going through another cycle of refining. But you're never actually writing code. So this is a little different than AI used with, like, say, Copilot, which is more of like a fancy autocomplete, right? Where it just creates you an individual function or something like that. So we're talking about applications where you didn't write a single line of that code and just vibing back and forth. That's why it's called vibe coding, is you sort of get into this vibe back and forth in a dialogue with the AI to build the application. Now, that's really cool for some of us that have had a need, I think particularly for like small utilities. You ever said like, man, I really want a tool that did this, or I want a portal that does that, or whatever, but I'll never get engineering resources, and I could probably do it, but it's gonna take forever, and I don't have that kind of time right now. You can just vibe it. There's a lot of cool utility in that, but it also produces a lot of crazy ass code, right? That is, I mean, you wanna talk about maintainable code, this ain't it. Well, and that's the thing. And right now, the AIs are still young enough that, and a lot of times you'll say, oh, you know, can you add this feature? It will just rewrite the whole damn thing. It doesn't care. It just rewrites the whole thing, right? So the idea of maintainability goes completely out the window. So I think, you know, we've been trying as an industry to stamp out spaghetti code, try to create things that are reusable, that are, you know, properly refactored, modularized, and that's going to go completely out the window over the next 5 years. Something to try, but it's going to change. It's going to change everything that we do. And actually, one of the things that is considered a pattern is to actually describe the software that you want to an LLM and say, write me a specification for an application that does this. It gives you a giant spec. Go then check and make sure that, and then you feed that in to actually write it, right? So we have LLM on top of, you know, AI on top of AI on top of AI on top of AI. It's turtles all the way down.
So this is more of a comment, I guess, than a question, but I've only been using GitHub Copilot for a little bit, and sometimes I'll tell it to create a function for me in a specific file, and it'll just decide, hey, all those other functions of the file, I'm going to delete all of them.
Yep.
And it kind of goes back to what you were saying. It doesn't really always want to build upon itself. And it's kind of weird because I was talking with someone at my company and they're like, well, think about it like being a junior assistant. And I'm like, well, I don't think a junior assistant would ever think when I told them to add a function to delete all the other functions. I'm sure I'm using it a little bit wrong. It's just weird that that's like a default almost,
No,
right?
it's not wrong. I mean, yeah, no, think of a well-meaning junior engineer trying to prove themselves who doesn't know right? You very well could have a new engineer who's like, I'm going to show them how smart I am and rewrite the whole darn thing. But yeah, you have to be deeply, the whole idea there, I think, of treating it like a junior is that you just need to be deeply distrustful of the result that you're going to get.
Yeah.
And realize that if the result is not what you get, it's you, likely, who didn't sufficiently specify what you want to do. And so some of them, like Coda, a couple of different code editors now actually give you preemptive prompts that you can put into your settings, and you can put into there a list of things that get passed with every single input that are things like, I am helpful and complete, I only change what I absolutely must change, right? You give it basically a list of rules ahead of your prompt to try and encourage it to do the right thing.
Yeah, so kind of like two questions, and they're not like small. This may sound taught to people who don't have like law degrees. The purpose of like one of the main things of like government is to regulate the commercial space. So like those with access to the commercial space or serving the public for private gain, such as for in the example where you want to buy that bottle of wine. This always like so easy, just install an app, but that's rather neglectful because they're asking you to run a proprietary operating system. Sure, Android has Linux, but not everyone has Graphene OS. And then to run Graphene OS sustainably, you need a binary blob. You need a binary blob running in a coprocessor that is a backdoor. So those businesses, while intended, they are abusing you, the user, by demanding that software. And so government is having a hard time catching up. So kind of a big thing is if you want to do a job interview, you're kind of in this lower end side of the negotiation, or if you are at a job, you would need to use Zoom or MS Teams. You need to give fresh biometrics to a big cloud company pursuing AI, all hooked into Five Eyes, etc. So we do need a regulation that says something like, if you're going to be required to do job interview, both sides need to have like, you need to be able to do it with open source end-to-end encryption and not just put your biometrics everywhere, etc. The other thing is, I think DevOps, Ops, SRE people should probably spend like a year studying psychology and law, because like someone said here, when you're Ops, everyone is your customer and everyone is demanding. And DevOps people, they have two separate disciplines that they cultivated and harmonized. They're kind of on the middle end of the bell curve where they are 5x engineers, or at least 3x, and the salaries don't reflect that. And their immediate coworkers will resent them for one reason or another. Even the C-level people will resent them for one reason or another, because it doesn't kind of fit into the default culture, mindset everyone has. 10x engineers are always recognized. So I think a lot of ops, DevOps people, they should build platforms, because a lot of it is platform engineers. So a lot of ops people, I think, should gravitate towards B2B rather than individual contributors. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, I think it's always important to go with, think about your customer, right? And be thinking about things in sort of a, I don't know, almost capitalist terms, right? When it comes to technologies and standards, like if you don't like companies that are doing things in a certain way, you shouldn't patronize their businesses, and you should be vocal about that. So that we can naturally weed those out. I don't like the idea of solving things with regulation. We're definitely in an environment that there's a lot of opportunity to regulate things more stringently for the betterment of all, but those things can never keep pace. So trying to make sure that we're sort of careful about how we interact with those who provide services to us, and being vocal and expecting them to deliver. The other is that inside of organizations is to try and go back and think about like what our business do? What is the value that we're actually providing? And is it a wise use of my time to go and invest deeply in some of these things that may change very quickly? I don't think platform engineering is the right solution for every company, right? There's some cases where it's smaller, you have practices that work, right? Are we getting value to our customers quickly? Are developers productive? If they are, you don't need to like push them onto a platform because it's the soup du jour, right? Maybe it's the right solution, maybe it's not. But it's important to remember that it's a palette of capabilities out there that we can utilize to solve our problems. Same is true of Kubernetes, right? We saw there was a big push. There's a lot of people who migrated to Kubernetes that really never should have. They just created a whole bunch of new problems that were actually distractions from serving their customers, internal or external, and became a big drag on the organization. And I think we may get into a place in the future where I think we get a little bit more deliberate about not being so bespoke inside our organizations, right? If you think about like in manufacturing, if I'm building a plant, I'm probably not gonna like hire like a huge team to come and build my assembly line. Probably gonna go out to a third-party contractor who does this all the time, have them build it for me, and then have a contractual like interaction with them. We still do some kind of overstaffing in a lot of organizations where we hire a bunch of people to build bespoke things for our organizations. They don't necessarily need to. And we tend to not let that go until it ends up being fully commoditized off in the cloud. We just consume it as a service now, right? So I think we're still quite young actually as an industry. And I think that over the next, hopefully 5 to 10 years, we'll actually see some normalization. The downside of that is that while the amount of skills that will be required will be considerably reduced, we'll see a lot more normalization. That also means that our salaries are going to go down because they don't need us to be quite so specialized. And we already know that there's a lot of interesting salary issues in the industry right now. We still have some people in the very high end, and we have a bunch of other people sort of in the middle, and we haven't really seen salaries changing in general, right? So, and that's more of a societal issue, right? Everything costs more, and our wages aren't really increasing, right, across the industry. I have kids who are like never going to have a house, so like, it bugs me. Okay, Ryan.
And this will be the last one.
So thinking about what you said about focusing on the value I myself can provide an organization, right? How do we get to the attention of like hiring managers, recruiters, et cetera, and tell that story to them when the AI filters now are in place that are just like trained on these garbage, key buzzwordy descriptions?
I don't know. Actually, that's an interesting thing to do, to do a test of AI-generated job descriptions, because I'll tell you honestly, I bet you that Claude, by the way, if you're using OpenAI, just stop. Like, Anthropic's where it's at. Go use Claude 3.7 is amazing. I actually think that the AIs probably would give us better job descriptions rather than worse. I think that one of the reasons JDs tend to be terrible is I think there's a lot that gets like lost in translation, and people think about, well, I need this skill set, and they have in their mind what they actually expect them to do inside the organization, but they distill that into this like list and then hope that that list represents, right? And you saw like the commonality in all the job descriptions we looked at, right? All of a sudden these things of being generic, you can't actually determine sort of what you're actually going to do. So I think focusing more on that task at the time of the job description, right? And then letting that filter through so that when people apply, they can more accurately have an idea of where they're actually to go. And that can ultimately feed back into whether or not it's what you really want to do inside an organization. But that also goes against like the idea of mobility, right? I think part of that idea of having a more generic skill set is, well, I'm going to have them doing this today, but in 6 months' time or a year's time, that project may change or they might get moved, and so we're hiring for a generic set of skills. And that's where I think we can more or less say that like there is some standardization across the board, right? Hopefully that could then filter down into better education, right? I think on the operations side, there's still a huge gap in terms of education. It's just really, really hard to get educated on this stuff, and that's something that we could better sort of standardize so that you have a larger pool of workers who have, you know, a robust set of skills that can be applied in a lot of different ways rather than, you know, do you know this one very specific technology today?